Hello and welcome to week 9 in History of Psychology, where we're going to be taking on behaviorism, the beginnings of behaviors, actually the antecedents, chapter 9, the antecedents leading to what we now know as behaviorism or applied behavior analysis, behavior management, cognitive behavior therapy. These are very modern techniques, very, very current. And we're going to be building through a few chapters here looking at that. First, chapter 9, antecedents, and then chapter 10, the beginnings of behaviorism. And then the next chapter we'll get into applied behavior analysis, and Skinner and all that stuff. So in chapter 9, we're introduced to these beginning individuals that are starting this approach that is diametrically opposed to introspection. That's a very, very important aspect of this. This whole idea, behaviorism, really arose out of psychologists trying to make this particular science more objective, and we're going to see that in chapter 10 also. But you're looking at real individuals that when I observe something, none of this like interpretation of my own experience that we got from introspection and all that stuff. If I'm going to observe human behavior, I'm going to observe it directly, record it scientifically and objectively, and we start to see that in the antecedents that coming in. We're introduced to Pavlov, who introduces us. If you've taken Intro to Psych, you know about Pavlov and classical conditioning. You know about Pavlov's dogs and ringing the bell and making him salivate because of the association learning that happens between the object of desire, the steak or the food, and the bell. And pretty soon the bell has the ability to elicit salivation all on its own. And the learning through association that occurs. We're also introduced to Thorndike, key figure in moving that. Pavlov wasn't a psychologist. He was a physiologist and happened to be a great scientist and happened to make all of these observations and whatnot. Thorndike kind of took this stuff and he said, let's look at, are there mechanisms, are there rules? Almost a sort of structuralist, functionalist perspective coming back again. And again, borrowing from physics and biology and whatnot, are there laws that govern human behavior? And Thorndike produced two, of which we are going to revisit when we start talking about Skinner's behaviorism. The first is the law of effect. The law of effect is if you engage in a behavior and you perceive that there's a positive consequence from that behavior, it's more likely that you're going to do that behavior. If you exercise a behavior and you perceive a negative consequence from that, then that behavior is likely to decrease or go away. That's the law of effect, one of the only laws that we see in the field of psychology. The other one is the law of exercise, and although all you exercise and fitness people would like to think that that's what it's about, it actually has nothing to do with that. Well, it has to do with that too. But what this means is if you do it over and over, every time you do this behavior over and over, that reward continues, that behavior becomes extremely solid. I guess that applies to regular exercise too. The more you do it, the more regular it will become. Your body gets used to engaging in exercise. I guess it has to do with that. In the chapter 9 discussion, I'm having you pull back a little bit. We're looking at Pavlov's work, and we're thinking, just like what we were talking about in this class before, we're looking at animal behavior and making assumptions about human behavior. Remember that evolutionary thought from Darwin is still very embedded in this scientific thinking. Now, if learning occurs in dogs, which we consider cognitively lower than human beings on the evolutionary scale, then would those same principles apply to human beings? And of course, that was the presumption that carried into Thorndike's work. So I want you to talk about how far can we go in looking at animal behavior and making the presumption that's the same sort of experience as what we would go through. The other tail of that is anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is when we go a little too far in presuming the behavior of animals is human-like. Now, anthropomorphism also describes little children's perception of their stuffed animals being alive and have feelings. There's those kinds of things too, but for the context of what we're looking at now, we're reading into a lot. Your dog comes up to you and he's wagging his tail after you've been gone for the weekend, and you're like, oh, he missed me. Does he miss you, or is he just hungry and he's learned that if you do that, you're going to pay attention and you'll end up feeding the dog? So there's only so far that we can go before we're starting to make some pretty grand judgments there. So let's have a talk about that. How far can we go with the study of animals? What's your experience? What's your thoughts and opinions? And then on the Chapter 9 assignment is actually straight out repeat of an assignment that is in my Introduction to Psychology class when we talk about classical conditioning, and that is taking all those terms of classical conditioning and applying them to an advertisement. You have to find an advertisement that very much embodies that associated learning, where images or sounds or whatever feelings are associated with the product in order to sell that product. So it's a direct repeat from that assignment, again, to get that solid knowledge into about how classical conditioning works in advertising. We then go to Chapter 10 and we start looking at, the beginnings of behaviorism, and boy, oh boy, some of the shameful experiments that we get into, including one with Watson. And so I send you to a website about the 10 experiments that should never have happened, shouldn't have ever happened, taking a look at those and telling me, let's have a discussion about those particular experiments and what they're like and what it says about this period of time in the field of psychology. And then, kind of bringing this right around, I said at the beginning of today's video that we're really looking at the science of psychology trying to be more objective, trying to get away from that introspective thing and into something much more, what's considered much more scientific and objective. For the quiz, I want you to describe Watson's experimental method that he insisted upon in his laboratory in order to show that psychology was an objective science. I want you to look that up and describe it in your own words. So that's where we are here. Again, we're kind of coming over a little bit of a hump here and into concepts that are still very modern, even though they're in the history. They've been around for a while, but these concepts are still very much alive in the field of psychology. And unlike the influences of before that are alive, these schools of thought, the behaviorist school of thought, is still very large, still very influential, and arguably one of the most effective tools we've had for bringing about change in other people and ourselves. So very, very powerful tools here. And we'll get a little bit more into that next week when we talk about Skinner's work. So that's it for this week. Enjoy the week. Hopefully it gets a little sunny. Be great. TJ, I think you're on a cruise. So rock on. Have a good time with that. And I will see you folks on the discussion boards and be following up on grading your work. Have a great week. Take care.